You don't associate the northwest of England with the Wild West of America, but did you know that Buffalo Bill once rode into town in Salford? And as I found out, he left behind an incredible story. It looks like any other ordinary grave, doesn't it? Here lies George Edward Williams, as we're about to find out, a quite remarkable man. And yet this grave marks the end of an extraordinary story, a story that has its beginnings in the heartlands of the Wild West of America.
A story that begins here, in the 1870s in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, home to many of the prairie tribes of the Sioux Nation. It was the dawn of a new age in the West, crying out for heroes, and soon found one in the exploits of William Frederick Cody. But as the buffalo herds were wiped out and the West was won, he found new outdoor shows of all time. He toured the world and brought real cowboys and Indians, trick shooters, rough riders, stagecoaches, wagon trains, and even a herd of buffaloes to Salford to sell out crowds in 1888 and returned again in style in 1903.
It's an amazing skyline, isn't it? But back in 1888, things would have been very different here.
Well, imagine 3 long rows of tents. The centre one, Indian teepees, as far as you could see. And then tents for the cowboys and the hangers-on as well. And then right at the end, a large tent for Buffalo Bill himself, with a stuffed buffalo, would you believe, outside. Imagine what it must have looked like. A stuffed buffalo each side of the doorway. And inside, a stuffed buffalo head that he'd shot sometime.
Local historian John Aldred's been piecing together the story of Buffalo Bill's visits.
John, it must have been an amazing spectacle.
Yes, it must have been. They had a tremendous auditorium, huge place. And it had supports up the sides which were decorated with Indian pictures and teepee drawings and totem poles and all that kind of thing. They reckon there were seats inside it for 8,000 people. Wow. And it could actually accommodate.
But something remarkable happened when Buffalo Bill's Wild West left Salford in 1903. A 26-year-old Sioux chief called ChargingThunder stayed behind. He would never see his prairie homelands again. Instead, he remained and raised a family in Gorton in Manchester.
He was a tall, quiet man, slim, very sort of conscientious of what he did. Very helpful, would always put himself out. Very happy man, because my parents my mum had a very happy childhood. Would help anybody.
Rita Parr, who lives in Gorton, is one of ChargingThunder's 2 surviving grandchildren. They never met their grandfather. They were born after he died. And until now, they'd never talked about their amazing heritage. For Rita, who's fostered children all her life, growing up as a child and having a Sioux chief in the family was an incredible experience, and for her friends too.
They used to ask, did he go hunting? Did he kill bears? And I said, well, I do know he used to go with buffaloes and ride with buffaloes. And did he? And then Wars came to light. You say, well, my granddad was a Red Indian. He was a chief with a big headdress,
Gary Williams is Rita's cousin and ChargingThunder's grandson. He believes his love of nature comes from the family's Native American genes. His garden at his home in Holmes Chapel is a paradise for birds. He recalls how amazed he was as a child to discover who his grandfather was.
Couldn't believe it. I just thought, how? I felt a bit cheated that I didn't look more like, I couldn't look the part. I tried wearing the beads and growing my hair, that didn't work. But I'm quite proud, really, because a lot of people don't know, even 2 generations back.
The story of how and why ChargingThunder came to stay in Manchester remains a mystery to Rita and Gary. They know he married Josephine, one of the American horse trainers in Buffalo Bill's show. Their daughter Bessie became ill while in Manchester, and Rita thinks this is why they stayed.
My auntie, who was the eldest child, she was christened Elizabeth, but always known as Bessie. And she got diphtheria, and she was in the sanatorium for quite a while. And we think that was why he gave up to go back to the circus, travelling circus, and he stayed in Manchester. I'm very proud of him. I'd say a very strong-willed man to have given up his life like he did to settle here in Manchester and have a family, and to do what he did for them, and to give me a fantastic life and fantastic memories and heritage.
My grandmother used to be, she used to lead the horses round in the ring, you know, with a big stock whip, you know, getting them to go up and turn around. He used to do tricks on the backs of the horses.
ChargingThunder's name was changed to George Edward Williams after registering with the British immigration authorities to enable him to find work.
ChargingThunder, again, was an anglicised name, but the real name I learned from people in the American Indian movement, that would sound like Wane. So when he came to be registered in the UK, it sounded as though it began with a W. So I think the clerks gave him a name beginning with W, and Williams was chosen. Likewise, they had to have first names, so we got names of kings and queens like George, Edward, Josephine and Elizabeth.
My granddad was never George Edward Williams to me. He was ChargingThunder. But when people spoke about him, they say, oh yes, nicknamed him Darky. Oh, I remember Darky. Your granddad, yeah, ChargingThunder.
ChargingThunder worked at Bellevue Circus for many years. He especially liked the elephants, and one in particular called Nellie.
Whenever he used to get drunk, because apparently he was liked his drinking his cigarettes, and he got drunk, and he used to go to Bellevue and climb in, get himself in, he knew how to get in, and then go into the elephant's house and sleep with Nellie. And Nellie always protected him. She used to stand over him, a four-paw, stand over him, and nobody could touch my granddad until he was sober and he was ready for going home, and he used to get up and sort of feed Nellie, pat her and all that, and then go.
ChargingThunder died in 1929 from pneumonia. He was only 52. He was buried in West Gorton Cemetery.
My cheekbones and everything. That is a fantastic one of him. I would give my life to say that was 100% my granddad. I've always had pictures of him, but to actually, as I said, I can remember my gran, but never saw my granddad. But that's fantastic. That really made... I do know my granddad now.
There was one more surprise for Rita and Gary. Last week they heard that ChargingThunder's remaining family has been found in America. They're now looking forward to meeting their long-lost relatives. For ChargingThunder, the story seems to have no end.